Hello, I'm Garry Stevens, and welcome to the History in the Bible podcast. All the history, in all the books, in all the Bibles. Episode 1.46. The Conundrums of the two kings Jehoram. In the last episode of the History in the Bible, we left the northern kingdom run by King Ahaziah, son of Ahab and Jezebel, and the southern kingdom run by King Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat. If you get confused about names and dates, remember that I have charts and timelines at my site www.historyinthebible.com. One of the most intriguing mysteries from the two kingdoms period is that of King Jehoram of Judah, and King Jehoram of Israel. Each is also known as Joram. They were almost exact contemporaries. According to the Bible, Jehoram of Israel was preceded by a short-lived king called Ahaziah, and Jehoram of Judah was succeeded by a short-lived king called Ahaziah. A lot of coincidences here. Let's start with Jehoram of Judah, who ascended the throne in 852 BC during the brief reign of Ahaziah of Israel. In a typical diplomatic union, he was married to Ahaziah's sister, Athaliah, daughter of the wicked Ahab and Jezebel. This is the one time that the kings of Judah and Israel would mix their blood. There is some debate as to Athaliah's relation to the house of Omri. The Bible clearly says that she was Ahaziah's sister, therefore Ahab's daughter, and so Omri's granddaughter. A sizable number of tenured professors who have too much time on their hands use various clues in the Bible to argue that she was Ahaziah's aunt, therefore Ahab's sister, and so Omri's daughter. Their theories are not crackpot, but let's not go there. We have other questions to ask. Upon ascending the throne, Jehoram of Judah killed all his brothers in the enduringly lovable way of the Hebrew monarchies. All his misfortunes were attributed to his marriage to Athaliah of Israel. Quote, 2 Chronicles 21:6. He followed the practices of the kings of Israel, doing what the house of Ahab had done, for he married a daughter of Ahab. He did what was displeasing to the Lord. However, the Lord refrained from destroying the house of David for the sake of the covenant he had made with David, and in accordance with his promise to maintain a lamp for him and his descendants for all time. End quote. And misfortunes Jehoram had aplenty. In the prophet's last years, Elijah wrote him a nasty letter, prophesying that his bowels would fall out. Yeah. Jehoram failed to squash a revolt in the Judean city of Libnah. He lost the entire Negev and control of the trade routes to Egypt. He was invaded by Philistines and Arabs. The invaders managed to capture all of Jehoram's wives and sons. Or, if you believe Chronicles over Kings, all his sons save for one. Under Jehoram, the little kingdom of Judah was falling apart. Meanwhile, in Israel, after a scant year or two, Ahab's son Ahaziah was followed by a king also called Jehoram. The traditional dating for this Jehoram's reign is 851 BC. The Book of Kings records that Ahaziah had no son. Without further ado, it simply says that Jehoram followed Ahaziah onto the throne. The Bible is uncharacteristically silent about this Jehoram's ancestry. Tradition holds that he was Ahaziah's brother, and so a brother to the Athaliah married to Judah's Jehoram. Jehoram of Israel's reign covers a whopping 9 chapters in 2 Kings. although most of those chapters are given over to the miracles worked by the prophet Elisha. This Jehoram fared little better than Jehoram of Judah. King Meshach of Moab rebelled against him. The prophet Elisha promised victory. Buoyed by God's prediction, Jehoram marched with the king of Edom, Moab's southern neighbour, to put down this impudence, a classic pincer movement. We know the result from one of the most important artefacts from the Two Kingdoms period, the Moabite stone discovered in the late 19th century. It's also called the Mesha inscription. This round-topped basalt column celebrated Mesha's triumph at Mount Nebo, the death place of Moses, east of the Jordan in the lands of the tribe of Reuben. Quote, Omri was king of Israel, and oppressed Moab during many days, and Chemosh was angry with his aggressions. His son succeeded him, and he also said, I will oppress Moab. Now Omri took the land of Medeba, and occupied it in his day, and in the days of his son 40 years. And Chemosh had mercy on it in my time. And Chemosh said to me, Go, take Nebo against Israel. And I went in the night, and I fought against it from the break of day till noon, and I took it. And I killed in all 7,000 men, but I did not kill the women and maidens, for I devoted them to Ashtar Chemosh. And I took from it the vessels of Yahweh, and offered them before Chemosh. End quote. Having decided to record Elisha's bold prediction of success, the Deuteronomist had to find a way to explain its failure. He does so in two cryptic verses. Quote, 2 Kings 3:26. When the king of Moab saw that the battle had gone against him, he took with him 700 swordsmen to break through to the king of Edom, but they failed. Then he took his firstborn son, who was to succeed him as king, and offered him as a sacrifice on the city wall. The fury against Israel was great. They withdrew and returned to their own land. End quote. The king of Moab sacrifices his own son, and the Israelites run away in sheer disgust. That's one way to explain Elisha's failed prediction, but not a convincing one. 4 chapters of Jehoram's reign are given over to miracles wrought by the prophet Elisha. After the time of Moses, the Old Testament rarely records wonder-working. The stories of Elisha are exceptions. Elisha provides endless oil for a widow. He revives a dying child. He renders harmless a poisoned stew. He feeds a multitude. He heals a leper. He makes an axe head float. Sound familiar? Most of Elisha's stories are set during the reign of the Omrids, the kings against whom Elijah fumed. But the context does not ring true. The stories of Elijah are set in a time in which the kings of Israel rule supreme from the city of Samaria, and the royal family is patently polytheistic, a policy abhorrent to the prophets of Yahweh. That perfectly fits the Omrids. The Elisha stories, on the other hand, paint the kings of Israel as international weaklings, hard-pressed to defend their capital from the Arameans. Yet they are strong supporters of Yahwism, and on good terms with the prophets. Elisha's stories presuppose close positive relations between the king of Israel and the prophet. Although they are attributed to the time of the house of Omri, the stories of Elisha seem to fit better with its successor, the house of Jehu. Elisha now completes one of the tasks that God had charged Elijah with, anointing Hazael king of Aram Damascus. Long quote. 2 Kings 8:7. Elisha arrived in Damascus at a time when King Ben-Hadad of Aram was ill. The king was told, "The man of God is on his way here." And Ben-Hadad said to Hazael, "Meet the man of God, and through him inquire of Yahweh, Will I recover from this illness? Hazael went to meet him. He said, Your son, King Ben-Hadad of Aram, has sent me to you to ask, Will I recover from this illness? Elisha said to him, Go and say to him, You will recover. However, Yahweh has revealed to me that he will die. The man of God wept. Why does my lord weep? Asked Hazael. Because I know, he replied, what harm you will do to the Israelite people. You will set their fortresses on fire, put their young men to the sword, dash their little ones in pieces, and rip open their pregnant women. Elisha said, Yahweh has shown me a vision of you as king of Aram. Hazael left Elisha and returned to his master, who asked him, What did Elisha say to you? He replied, He told me that you would recover. The next day Hazael took a piece of netting, dipped it in water, and spread it over his face. So Ben-Hadad died, and Hazael succeeded him as king. End quote. I think it's worth pointing out that the horrors that Elisha sees the Arameans inflicting on the Israelites are exactly the same as the Israelites inflicted on the Canaanites during the conquest of Joshua. As records from the Assyrians and the petty states of the Levant make perfectly clear, these were just standard military practice. I mentioned in episode 1.45 that the Bible records Israel and Ben-Hadad as enemies, but Assyrian records say the opposite. This story makes a lot more sense if the Assyrian account is correct, and Ben-Hadad was a friend to Ahab and Israel, not an enemy. Ben-Hadad's son Hazael came to the throne in the last years of the house of Omri. At that point, the Assyrians were no longer a threat. Hazael reversed his father's pro-Israel policy. He did his darned best to fulfill Elisha's prediction, spending an impressive 46 years on the Aramean throne, whacking the Israelites, while the Assyrians were preoccupied with bigger fish. Now, about those two kings with the same name. Two kings named Jehoram, one in Israel, one in Judah, reigning at the same time. Could they be the same person? No historian of the Middle Ages would think that just because a king called Henry ruled in England, at the same time as a king called Omri ruled in France, that they were therefore the same person. That never happened, by the way. Let's not get into Henry V. But we have abundant documentation for the European monarchies. We have little for the Hebrew kingdoms. The two Ahaziahs add to the confusion. Ahab of Israel's son Ahaziah reigns a single year, 850 BC, to be followed by Jehoram of Israel. Jehoram of Judah's son Ahaziah also reigns for a single year, 840 BC, to be followed by his mother Athaliah. One widely mooted idea is that the two Jehorams were the same person. He was a Judean Davidic king, the son of Jehoshaphat. The one Jehoram theory runs like this. Ahaziah of Israel left no heirs, and was the last of the house of Omri. He bequeathed his throne to his brother-in-law Jehoram, already king of Judah, and married to Ahaziah's sister, Athaliah. Perhaps for a decade, the two crowns were united. Jehoram's own son, Ahaziah, was named in honour of his uncle-in-law. But the Book of Kings records southern Jehoram as reigning until 845 BC, and the northern Jehoram as reigning until 840 BC. So, how do you explain that, smart guys? Simple. The one king moved north to counter threats from Hazael of Aram Damascus. He left his son Ahaziah in charge of the south, either as king or regent. And that is where the Deuteronomist became confused. The Deuteronomistic scribes failed to realize that the two Jehorams were the same person. The Book of Kings frequently refers to its two main sources, the annals of the kings of Judah and the annals of the kings of Israel. The deeds of Jehoram were recorded in different contexts in the two sets of records. That led the historian to conclude that they were two separate people. There are some tantalizing clues to support this idea. Kings always cross-references the reigns of the two kingdoms. When a new king is enthroned, the book always notes that he was enthroned in year such and such of the king of the other kingdom. The synchronisms have a lot of problems. The largest contradiction concerns Jehoram of Israel. In one chapter of Kings, he is said to have ascended during the time of Jehoshaphat of Judah. But in another passage, the book says he took the throne during the time of Jehoram of Judah. Simple scribal confusion explains that nicely. And there is this passage. Quote, 2 Chronicles 21:4. Jehoram of Judah proceeded to take firm hold of his father's kingdom, and put to the sword all his brothers, as well as some of the officers of Israel. End quote. Of course, Jehoram killed all his brothers, but why would he want to kill the officers of Israel? And on what possible authority could he do so? He was king of Judah, unless he was also king of Israel. Were there two Jehorams or only one? We will never know. Jehoram's reign was abruptly extinguished in a coup. If you buy the one Jehoram theory, Jehoram of the United Kingdom and his son Ahaziah, regent of Judah, were conducting a military operation against Hazael of Aram Damascus in southern Israel. If you buy the two Jehoram theory, Ahaziah of Judah was no relation, but was Jehoram of Israel's best mate. Quote, 2 Kings 8:28. Ahaziah marched with Joram to battle against King Hazael of Aram at Ramoth Gilead. But the Arameans wounded Joram. King Joram retired to Jezreel to recover from the wounds which the Arameans had inflicted upon him at Ramah, when he fought against King Hazael of Aram. And King Ahaziah, son of Joram of Judah, went down to Jezreel to visit Joram son of Ahab while he was ill. End quote. God had previously directed Elijah to make Jehu, king of Israel, to rid the kingdom of the evil house of Omri. Elijah thwarted God's plan by dying, leaving the prophet Elisha to consummate the task. Elisha thought the assignment beneath him, or perhaps too dangerous. He delegated the hazardous job to an unnamed young man. Quote, 2 Kings 9:6. The young man poured the oil on Jehu's head, saying to him, Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I anoint you king over the people of the Lord, over Israel. You shall strike down the house of your master Ahab, so that I may avenge on Jezebel the blood of my servants the prophets. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish. The dogs shall eat Jezebel in the territory of Jezreel, and no one shall bury her. Then he opened the door and fled. End quote. I like that last sentence. Then he opened the door and fled. Take ownership, Elisha. With the blessing of God's prophet, Jehu hastened to Jezreel, where Jehoram and Ahaziah were in conference. His mission was bloody slaughter. Quote, 2 Kings 9:21. Then King Joram of Israel and King Ahaziah of Judah set out, each in his chariot, and went to meet Jehu. They met him at the property of Naboth the Jezreelite. When Joram saw Jehu, he said, Is all well, Jehu? Jehu answered, How can all be well, so long as the many whoredoms and sorceries of your mother Jezebel continue? Thereupon Joram turned his horses around and fled, crying out to Ahaziah, "Treason, Ahaziah!" But Jehu drew his bow and hit Joram between the shoulders, so that the arrow pierced his heart, and he collapsed in his chariot. End quote. For good measure, Jehu of Israel also has King Ahaziah of Judah assassinated. Jehu ramps up the action by slaughtering 42 brothers of Ahaziah. Why, we are not told. Why would a man mounting a coup against the king of Israel kill the king of Judah? And how was that even possible? Where was Ahaziah's royal bodyguard? These accounts only make sense if Ahaziah and his brothers were claimants to the Israelite throne as well as the Judean. And that is only possible if there was only one King Jehoram. Jehu next deals with Jezebel, Ahab's widow. In the 2 Jehoram theory, she is Jehoram of Israel's mother. In the 1 Jehoram theory, she is Jehoram of Judah's mother-in-law. Either way, she has to go. Long quote. When Jehu came to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it. She painted her eyes and adorned her head and looked out of the window. As Jehu entered the gate, she said, "Is all well, murderer of your master?" Jehu said, "Throw her down." So they threw her down. Some of her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses, which trampled on her. Jehu said, "See to that cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter." But when they went to bury her, they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. When they came back and told him, he said, "This is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite. In the territory of Jezreel the dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel." End quote. Jezebel goes out in magnificent defiance. Think Betty Davis. She is the first character in the Bible to wear makeup, which is why some Christians disdain the practice. Jehu then wrote to the elders of Israel, challenging them to make someone other than himself king. Foreseeing consequences it did not take a prophet to predict. The elders thought that Jehu would make a fine king. In a second missive, Jehu asked the elders for a token of their support. Quote, 2 Kings 10:1. Now Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria. Jehu wrote the elders and officials a letter saying, "If you are on my side, and if you are ready to obey me, take the heads of your master's sons and come to me at Jezreel tomorrow at this time." Now the king's sons, 70 persons, were with the leaders of the city, who were charged with their upbringing. When the letter reached them, they took the king's sons and killed them. They put their heads in baskets and sent them to Jehu at Jezreel. End quote. Jehu isn't finished in cleansing Israel. Long quote. 2 Kings 10:18. Jehu assembled all the people and said to them, "Ahab served Baal little. Jehu shall serve him much. Therefore summon to me all the prophets of Baal, all his worshippers and all his priests." Jehu was acting with guile in order to exterminate the worshippers of Baal. Jehu gave orders to convoke a solemn assembly for Baal. Jehu sent word throughout Israel, and all the worshippers of Baal came. Then Jehu came into the temple of Baal and said to his soldiers, "Search and make sure that there are no worshippers of the Lord among you, but only worshippers of Baal." So they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. But Jehu had stationed 80 of his men outside. When Jehu had finished presenting the burnt offering, he said to the guards and to the officers, "Come in and strike them down." The guards and the officers struck them down with the sword and left them lying where they were. They destroyed the pillar of Baal, and they tore down the temple of Baal and turned it into latrines, as it is to this day. End quote. The Bible is ambivalent about Jehu. God directed Elisha and Elijah to appoint him the agent of vengeance against the evil house of Omri. That worked out nicely. In an unusual move, God bypassed the prophets and spoke directly to the new king. Quote, 2 Kings 10:30. The Lord said to Jehu, "Because you have acted well and done what was pleasing to me, having carried out all that I desired upon the house of Ahab, 4 generations of your descendants shall occupy the throne of Israel." End quote. Jehu was the agent of a vengeful God, chosen by Elijah and commissioned by Elisha to exterminate the Omrids. But that was the extent of God's beneficence to the new king. The Hebrew kingdoms would spend the rest of their days in the dark shadows of more powerful states. At first Aram, Damascus and Assyria, and finally Babylon. In the next episode of the History in the Bible, we follow Israel's house of Jehu for a century, then catch up with the events in the kingdom of Judah. It's a bumpy ride. I'll see you then, and thanks for listening.